Welcome to today's Explainer. You know, when we think about dinosaur evolution, our minds usually jump straight to biology, right? We picture sharp teeth, giant claws, and fierce competition. But what if I told you that the absolute biggest driver of their entire 165 million year reign was actually the ground beneath their feet? Today, we're going to trace the incredible story of plate tectonics and look at how shifting continents completely revolutionized dinosaur communities across the globe. Because 165 million years ago, the Earth looked entirely different. You had this single, massive supercontinent dictating the fate of early terrestrial life. And the really crucial takeaway we're exploring today is that changing geography, the literal breaking apart of the world, was the ultimate evolutionary engine. As the land shifted, it basically forced these amazing creatures to adapt, isolate, and diversify in ways they just never would have otherwise.
To really wrap our heads around this, let's just anchor ourselves in the immense scale of the Mesozoic era. Our story actually kicks off around the 252 million year mark with the Permian-Triassic extinction. From there, we track the emergence of the very first dinosaurs around 235 million years ago. Then that pivotal fracturing of Pangaea, the intense isolation of the continents that followed, right down to the infamous asteroid impact 66 million years ago. We've got a massive 165 million year time box to explore, so let's jump right in.
Starting right at the beginning with the Pangaea starting line. Picture this. The evolutionary board has just been wiped totally clean. The Permian-Triassic extinction, which is often called the Great Dying, wiped out most of the dominant land vertebrates. But early archaeosaurs, the ancestors of dinosaurs, actually survived. And why? Well, they had developed these incredible respiratory advantages. Things like unidirectional breathing, which essentially acted like highly efficient one-way bird lungs. And that allowed them to thrive in the really harsh, super dry climates of Pangaea. At this point, early dinosaurs were just these small bipedal carnivores, but because all the land on Earth was connected, they were able to spread out everywhere, which resulted in a shared, highly homogeneous dinosaur community across the entire globe. It's a stark contrast when you zoom out. In a Triassic, you have one connected world with the same types of dinosaurs everywhere. But fast forward to the late Cretaceous, you see completely isolated continents hosting wildly different, highly specialized dinosaur communities. So how exactly do we get from a single shared world to that kind of massive isolation? Well, the supercontinent breaks apart. Let's walk through the actual mechanical steps of this breakup, because this right here is the main catalyst. First, Pangaea practically unzips, splitting into a northern landmass called Laurasia and a southern one called Gondwana. Then this massive rifting creates totally new expanded coastlines and a much more humid, lush climate globally, which is a huge shift from the dry Triassic. And finally, this geographic division aggressively branches the dinosaur family tree. As the landmasses separate, populations are completely cut off from one another, pushing them down entirely new evolutionary paths. A perfect example of this adaptation is the sauropod. We're talking massive, four-legged, long-necked herbivores. Think Brachiosaurus. The warm, humid environments of the Jurassic fostered these towering conifer forests, non-flowering plants called gymnosperms. And to reach that high canopy food, sauropods evolved extreme gigantism. They even had to develop incredibly specialized cardiovascular systems just to pump blood 12 meters straight up to their heads. I mean, to put that into perspective, if a human had that kind of blood pressure, our hearts would literally explode. But as we know, the Earth absolutely does not sit still. The continents keep shifting and the plant life just keeps evolving. So I want you to keep this question in the back of your mind. How did rapidly changing plant life shape these increasingly isolated giants? Which brings us to divergent diets in habitats. This next era is marked by what scientists call the angiosperm terrestrial revolution. That sounds a bit formal, but it's basically the sudden, rapid diversification of flowering plants. And it was a real game changer. It completely revolutionized the dinosaur food chain. Suddenly, those towering conifers weren't the only game in town. Tougher, closer to the ground, highly nutritious flowering plants just began to take over the landscape. And this forced some truly radical adaptations in how dinosaurs ate. The evolutionary shift here is massive. Back in the Jurassic, you had long-necked sauropods dominating by eating high-canopy gymnosperms. But in the Cretaceous, as flowering plants took over, we see a huge rise in ornithischians, like the duck-billed hadrosaurs and the horned ceratopsians. These guys evolved amazingly complex dental batteries, made up of literally hundreds of interlocking teeth, just to grind up those tough flowering plants. And because they were so good at it, they largely replaced sauropods as the dominant herbivores in the northern hemisphere. Welcome to the Cretaceous Island worlds. Get this, by the late Cretaceous, rising sea levels and shifting tectonic plates had divided the Earth into as many as 12 isolated continental blocks. The land was more subdivided and fragmented than at any other time in the entire Mesozoic era. This effectively created a massive lifeboat scenario. With populations permanently trapped on these isolated island continents, we see the evolution of highly distinct herbivore communities, entirely divergent apex predators, and just incredible levels of species uniqueness. That globally shared dinosaur community we saw back in the Triassic, yeah, it is completely gone by this point. Geography was entirely dictating the food web. In North America, you've got tyrannosaurs hunting hadrosaurs and ceratopsians. But on isolated landmasses like India and Madagascar, tyrannosaurs don't even exist. Instead, you have completely different apex predators, abelosaurids like Majungasaurus, hunting massive titanosaurs. The environment completely, fundamentally reshaped who was eating whom. Scientists actually have a specific word for this: endemism. It perfectly encapsulates what happens when landmasses permanently separate. Dinosaurs that were trapped on regions like India and Madagascar were locked into completely unique evolutionary paths, restricted entirely to their geographic locations. And that resulted in some of the most specialized, bizarre dinosaurs we have ever discovered. But then, of course, comes a sudden global end. Around 66 million years ago, the non-avian dinosaurs abruptly vanished. Now, the massive Chicxulub asteroid impact was the primary driver here, accounting for roughly 75% of the environmental upheaval. But it was compounded by intense, ongoing volcanic stress from the Deccan Traps over in India, which contributed the remaining 25% of the ecological pressure. Put those two together, and it was a downright lethal combination. The devastation was rapid, and it was global. Ecosystems across all of those beautifully diverse isolated continents were just disrupted overnight. Ash and gas blocked the sun, causing plants to die off and food chains to absolutely collapse within weeks. Ultimately, 75% of all plant and animal species perished. But crucially, as the non-avian dinosaurs were cleared from the board, a massive ecological void was left behind. I actually want to read you this quote directly from the source material. It says, "The extinction of all large-bodied vertebrates undoubtedly impacted the post-KPG taxonomic, ecologic, and body mass diversification of various clades." Basically, what they are saying is that the sudden removal of these incredibly dominant dinosaurs created the exact ecological void necessary for small, surviving mammals to finally step out of the shadows, radically diversify, and, well, eventually lead to us. Which leaves us with a truly fascinating final question to ponder. If the supercontinent Pangaea had never broken apart, would that globally shared dinosaur community have survived the asteroid impact? Did the very geographic isolation that drove their incredible diversity also lock them into highly specialized niches that made them ultimately vulnerable to a global catastrophe? It's an amazing thought. Thanks for diving into this explainer with me.